Hi, nice to meet you all.
Okay, great. Okay, Caro, si estás lista, puedes conectar el Zoom con YouTube y también podrías compartir la pantalla si está posible. Sí. Okay, so thank you everybody who's joining us right now. My name is Theresa. For those of you who don't know me, I'm a research associate at CAPAS and I work within the event management team, and it's my great pleasure to share this discussion tonight or this afternoon, depending on wherever you're joining us. And we would like to start our roundtable with a video presentation of the film festival. So let's start with that.
Hola, les damos la bienvenida a la segunda edición del Festival Internacional de Cine sobre Envejecimiento, Miradas a través del tiempo. Mi nombre es Mónica Chadó.
Yo soy Carolina Guidotti. Ambas somos docentes e investigadoras del Centro Interdisciplinario de Envejecimiento de la Universidad de la República en Uruguay y docentes de la Facultad de Psicología de la misma universidad. Somos además las organizadoras de este festival en conjunto con otros docentes de universidades de la región y del mundo.
El objetivo del festival es poder transmitir y construir entre todas y todos una mirada no estereotipada sobre el envejecimiento y la vejez.
Esperamos que nos acompañen y que el festival nos anime a reflexionar sobre el paso del tiempo y el envejecimiento de todos. Muchas gracias.
Hola, ¿cómo están? Nos da muchísimo gusto darles la bienvenida a esta segunda edición del Festival Internacional de Cine sobre Envejecimiento, Miradas a través del tiempo. Yo soy Verónica Montes de Oca, investigadora titular del Instituto de Investigaciones Sociales y coordinadora del Seminario Universitario Interdisciplinario sobre Envejecimiento y Vejez de la Universidad Nacional Autónoma de México.
Les damos la más cordial bienvenida. Mi nombre es Valeria Espinosa, colaboradora del SUYE. Estamos muy emocionadas por esta experiencia, dado que va a ser una maravillosa oportunidad para poder vincular el envejecimiento, las vejeces y las miradas a través del cine. También es una muy buena oportunidad para construir vínculos entre todas las generaciones. Esperamos que lo disfruten muchísimo.
Hola, mi nombre es Abraham Khalid, coordinador general del Centro de Estudios Críticos en Cultura Contemporánea de la Universidad Autónoma de Querétaro. Quiero agradecer su presencia a la segunda edición del Festival Internacional de Cine sobre Envejecimiento, Miradas a través del tiempo. A nombre de todos los que colaboramos desde la Universidad Autónoma de Querétaro, los invitamos a unirse en estos ciclos de cine, donde no solo disfrutaremos de la mirada de los creadores, sino que también tendremos la oportunidad de reflexionar juntos sobre cómo entendemos estos procesos de vida y su impacto en la sociedad. Agradecemos los esfuerzos de todos los involucrados en este proyecto, organizadores, creadores y lo más importante, ustedes. Bienvenidos.
Bienvenidos y bienvenidas a esta segunda edición del Festival Internacional de Cine, Vejez y Envejecimiento, Miradas a través del tiempo. Mi nombre es Andrea Revilla y trabajo para la Universidad Católica de Freiburg y la Universidad de Heidelberg. Mis temas de investigación giran en torno a el cine y los procesos de vejez y envejecimiento, de tal suerte que me es un gran honor y satisfacción haber participado en la organización de este segundo festival y al mismo tiempo darles la bienvenida, esperando que disfruten y que podamos a partir del cine generar entornos más armónicos y más felices para los adultos mayores, pero también para las generaciones. Enhorabuena y que disfruten el festival.
Okay, for those of you who didn't understand all the content of the video, I will just again mention briefly that the organizers of the film festival Dr. Monica Yado and Dr. Carolina Guidotti of the university here in Montevideo, and their colleagues from Mexico City and the university in Querétaro in Mexico, and Andrea Revilla, who is also joining us tonight, introduced themselves. So I want to start with giving them a big thanks for the organization, and yeah, we're very happy that we could cooperate with CAPAS. And yeah, so we're also very happy that two of our fellows, Susan and Timo, that were able to join us tonight on a Saturday. So yeah, that's very great, and we're looking forward to a discussion with you. So Professor Susan Watkins is Professor of Women's Writing at the School of Humanities and Social Sciences at Leeds, a Metropolitan University in the United Kingdom, and currently, as I've mentioned, a CAPAS Fellow. Professor Timo Storck is Professor for Clinical Psychology and Psychotherapy at the Psychologische Hochschule in Berlin. And yeah, it's also a great pleasure for CAPAS that we could win Professor Carlos Ossa for our discussion tonight. Professor Ossa is a professor of philosophy at the University of Chile in Santiago de Chile. And since this is a bilingual meeting, also, thank you very much to Cecilia Male, who is doing her master's in translation. And in case we need a little help with translating from Spanish to English, English to Spanish, she's going to help us. So thank you, Cecilia, for your time and for your effort. And before we start with the discussion, CAPAS Director Robert Folger will share a few of his insights, will give an impulse for the discussion on today's topic, the time that remains, apocalypse and aging. And Robert Folger obviously is one of the directors of CAPAS, and he also holds a professorship of Romance literature with the Department for Romance Studies at Heidelberg University. And since this is the most interesting part of the evening, you know, the impulses and the discussions, I keep the introductions very, very short and will just pass the word to Robert. And Robert, you're currently muted, so please unmute your... Yeah, okay, perfect.
Sorry, this is it, the screen just disappeared. Sorry. Well, thank you so much, and Theresa, for the introduction. Thank you so much to the organizers of this great event. I mean, it's a great event, and we are very happy to participate. Probably, for those of you who are not familiar with CAPAS, I mean, it's sort of a little surprising constellation here. I mean, we're talking about old age and apocalypse. So Theresa said I have some insights to share. I would actually say I share some ideas and provide some context here why we thought, I mean, it would be interesting to look at the question of old age from the perspective of apocalypse and post-apocalypse. First, a few words about CAPAS. CAPAS is a Center for Advanced Studies funded by the German Ministry of Education and Research since March 2020. So we have something like 2.5 years. We have a small team. Theresa is one of them, and I'm one of the directors. What CAPAS really is about are the fellows we invite from all over the world to conduct research on their individual projects, but also and primarily and to engage in collaborative scholarly and scientific work. CAPAS is a project with a basis in the humanities, but our purpose and also challenge is transdisciplinary work. We invite fellows not only from the humanities, but also from the social sciences, natural sciences, life sciences, you name it, all from all fields. So we have a broad range from cultural studies, literary criticism to politics, law, psychology, astronomy, etc. And today, again, thanks, two of our fellows participate in this panel, Susan and Timo. Thank you very much for making this possible. And of course, also Carlos Ossa, who joins us today from Chile. What brings all these people together at CAPAS is obviously an interest in apocalypse and post-apocalypse. I have to explain a few things regarding this. By apocalypse, we do not mean the total destruction of the planet, the universe, or of mankind. This is a limited understanding, which amounts to, then it would be something like translating apocalypse into terms of total catastrophe without transcendence. Apocalypse, on the other hand, is a very particular, intriguing figure for framing radical change. It is related to the end of the world, or better, the end of one world and the beginning of another. Hence, post-apocalypse, this would be a nonsensical term if apocalypse were the same as total destruction. The question arises then, what is the world and when does it end? The world is the world as we know it. A life world which we experience without further reflection as a normality, the way things simply are, the way we live our everyday life. The premise of this idea is that there is more than one world we live in. Hence, you have the notion of paramount reality, which encapsulates this idea. So there's different realities and there's one paramount reality, and this is the world that will end in an apocalypse. The world does end when the normal environment and our way of being embedded in this environment and live our life radically change. Hence, apocalypse has other implications. It is, as I already pointed out, not total. Apocalypse is not necessarily a single event, not necessarily something that will happen in the future, but an event or series of events that already happened in the past. This is then a cyclical notion of apocalypse, or maybe an apocalyptic spiral. Another consequence is if apocalypse is not total, it can also affect smaller groups, cultures, civilizations, smaller groups, and ultimately, and this is a point I will elaborate briefly on, the individual. In a secular everyday usage, apocalypse is equaled with other forms of catastrophe. The terms are, however, not interchangeable because apocalypse is not the catastrophe. The empirical, observable, radical change, breakdown of systems, but rather a way of framing this empirical or also imagined or anticipated radical change. Apocalypse is a narration, that is important, that postulates the beginning and an end. As a narrative, it gives sense to something our senses or mind per se cannot grasp. The particular relation of apocalypse and its narrative nature, as well as the different scales of apocalypse, imply that it is an event and, at the same time, an experience that affects ultimately a subject, that is, an individual. Early on, when I started working on the theoretical and methodological frame of kappas, I had the idea, more of an intuition, that aging and old age is related to apocalypse, or vice versa, that apocalyptic thinking can tell us something about aging. Why? The answer will, I hope at least, explain the criteria for the selection of the short films we will discuss today. One criterion was, needless to say, so I say it in parentheses, that we really liked these movies and appreciate their cinematographic value, so congratulations to the directors. The common stereotypical view of old age is one of loss. The loss of agency, mobility, potency of friends, family, and ultimately the loss of life. In other words, with the loss of agency and mobility and social bonds, the world, a particular world, is slowly disappearing. This corresponds to a common doom and gloom notion of apocalypse, which is, as I said, not kappas, of total destruction without transcendence. In this perspective, apocalyptic aging is something to be overcome, avoided, repressed, or postponed as much as possible. Apocalypse, however, has a very particular temporal structure, which is related to the narrative structure, and two more ingredients I have not mentioned so far, namely the notion of revelation. The apocalyptic end reveals something, some sort of truth. There's also the idea of closure, which is the second ingredient, And this is essential to apocalypse. Apocalypse transforms senseless destruction, death, into a meaningful event that transcends radical change and the end. Apocalyptic temporality can be conceived of what has been called messianic time, the time that time needs to come to an end. Think about the Christian tradition. The first coming of the Messiah has already saved humanity, but this must be completed or fulfilled by the second coming. The time until the second coming is the time that remains, a time when things fall into place, when an existence is, as it were, completed, all that has happened related in a meaningful way to an end. In this sense, all human history is messianic, but it's obscured by chronological time. When we are young, we know that we will die, but the perceived distance to the end makes it possible to ignore this human condition for the most time. Only when the aging process or other physical ailments or impediments signal that the end is nigh, messianic times comes to the fore. In this perspective, old age can also be seen as a form of messianic time, a time when chronological time is transformed into or foregrounded as a time to make sense of a life, to heal wounds, a time not primarily of pain, but also of care and cure. In the selection of short films, we had an eye on the two antagonistic yet related visions of old age. A, the notions of a disastrous disappearance of life and world, and attempts to stall, repress, or negate this process. And B, narratives of old age as the time that remains to make things right and bring a story to a meaningful end. So now I'm very interested if the participants of this panel see the same sort of uplifted themes and structures I do in the selected movies, but I'm pretty sure, I mean, you all have better ideas than what I had. So I will actually not comment on the movies right now. Of course, I have some ideas, but I'm very interested to hear what you think about them.
Thank you very much, Robert. And I think we can keep this discussion quite spontaneous, so you can just go ahead. If you want to start with an idea, comment, yeah.
Hi, everybody. Yes, I was really enjoyed the films and very happy to start things going. One of the things that interested me was the fact that in many context, aging is seen not only as a sort of personal apocalypse for the individual, but also a sort of apocalyptic disaster for society as a whole and even for the species. So we often think of, you know, the silver tsunami, an age quake, a sort of demographic ticking time bomb. These are the kinds of terms that are used, aren't they, about the increasing numbers of aging people, particularly in the global north. And what I liked very much about all of the films was that I felt they all, to some extent, focused on the individual and sort of avoided that narrative of apocalyptic decline. I liked the fact that one of them in particular engaged in a sort of speculative mode, and so started to think about aging in the future and what the implications might be for imagining aging futures. I still think that possibly verged on the dystopian with the sort of disappearance of the older character into a sort of digital future. I'd be really interested to hear what other people thought about that as a trend, whether that's a sort of something that is being seen as a warning, that that connection between aging and digital futures particularly I thought was very interesting.
Maybe I can just pick up some of these thoughts, because I found particularly interesting that I think in most films we have also an intergenerational perspective on aging, both in terms of society as on a very personal level, like when we think of Beto experiencing, obviously, a catastrophe when he loses his father. And that's where
Right.
where the film stops. So we're kind of in the same position, having to deal with questions about and after, which can't really be better, at least can't grasp, and keeps looking for his father, because it's so apocalyptic. And I think in some variations, we have the view on aging from the perspective of generations that obviously also age, but not in old age yet. Like when it comes to, I think it's a Spanish film about Cuba, where the pictures even contrast the younger generation and the older one. So I thought on a personal, individual level, we see, well, the impact of aging, but also in between generations.
Yeah, and I also really liked the fact that in the within the relationship between Beto and his father, we don't see the old person as hopeless or, you know, inactive or unable. He's caring for someone who's disabled and who he loves, and that sort of ethic of care between them was really powerful, I thought, and captured really brilliantly by that filmmaker in the documentary format. And I did really enjoy that particular film, because it showed the old person, okay, he had the older person had his doubts about the responsibility of caring for his son, but he also took on that work and was capable of providing it, obviously, until the very end of the film. And he was a character that we really were able to identify with and not see as a sort of object in the way that older people are often seen. So yeah, I really enjoyed that particular film.
I think we even have very striking sentences he utters, like his view on people getting a cancer diagnosis and being confronted with a very concrete time that remains. And that he says that would lead him to even live more happily.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So again, it's sort of avoiding that doom-laden narrative for him as an individual, but also, I mean, I suppose at the end of the film where his son is left without his care, there's a question there, isn't there, about, I suppose, where that leads us as the viewer, where it leaves his son. But I just enjoyed the way that throughout the film, the older character was the source of all the care, he wasn't the object of it, he was the subject of that film, I felt very much.
Excuse me for a second. I don't know if it makes sense to do this a brief pause so I can give Carlos some context, maybe.
Yeah, so that's fine. Go ahead.
Yeah,
thank you, Cecilia.
Bueno, entonces se mencionó, la profesora Susan mencionó una relación entre la digitalización y el envejecimiento, brevemente. No sé si es que quisieras comentar algo al respecto. Y después se habló de un corto español, pero que tematiza Cuba. Y bueno, sobre la catástrofe que es para Beto el perder a su padre. Se mencionó también las preguntas sobre qué viene después de la muerte del padre, porque hay una constante búsqueda por parte de Beto. También se mencionó este contraste generacional, también a través de las imágenes. Y hizo hincapié en que la persona no es inútil, sino que tiene es responsable por el cuidado de su hijo, y que claro, después de la muerte el hijo se queda sin el cuidado que recibe de su padre. Entonces no sé si quisieras hacer algún comentario al respecto.
Sí, muchas gracias por tu traducción, Cecilia. Al mismo tiempo, agradecer a la organización por esta gentil invitación que me han hecho a poder comentar con ustedes y discutir algunos de los aspectos que estos films tienen respecto a una siempre embarazosa y compleja pregunta relacionada con la vejez, la muerte y el tiempo. ¿Sigo, Cecilia, o vas traduciendo después? ¿Cómo
Creo que
lo prefieres?
unos 2 minutos más o menos puedo tomar notas
Ya.
y luego hago un breve
Yo
resumen.
voy a hablar lo suficientemente lento para que no tengamos problemas con... Yo hablo muy rápido, pero esta vez lo voy a hacer muy lento.
Muchas gracias.
Ujú. Quisiera señalar efectivamente un cruce en estos proyectos fílmicos que yo los asocié con algunas palabras para cada uno, para Juan, Aurora, las canciones de la Revolución, Storch, y de vez en cuando, que me permitieron tratar de encontrar entre todas estas cintas algo en común que hiciera posible leer en qué medida vejez y apocalipsis tienen un texto, comparten un texto. Y lo que descubrí fue que en la tradición occidental la vejez no es el fin, sino que es un nuevo comienzo. Y en ese sentido, el concepto de apocalipsis remite más a la idea de revelación que de destrucción, a la idea de buscar los fantasmas más que sencillamente quedar hundido en las sombras.
Ahora sí es un buen momento para una pausa, yo creo. Eh, So what Dr. Ossa is saying is that he tried to look for words that describe each of these short movies and to see how language is present in them, according to him. And so for him, an Occidental translation of death is, or of old age, is that it is not the end, but it is a new beginning. So in his words, apocalypse would not be about destruction, but about revelation. It is more about looking for ghosts. Yes. So I don't know if anyone wants to comment on that. I think that he has some really interesting keywords like revelation and ghosts and new beginning.
Yeah, I think the idea about ghosts is really interesting because I didn't know. I wonder what people made of the end of Aurora 2068. So at the moment where I assume the daughter, I assumed, had decided to upload her mother to sort of the digital world, and then the mother sort of wakes in that environment and then calls out her daughter's name. How are we meant to interpret that? Are we meant to think that that she wants that? I didn't know how to take the end of that film, and whether it was a revelation in a, I couldn't see it as anything other than sort of horrific, actually. But I don't know if other people felt that way about it. The moment when she shouts out her name and the doctor sort of says, "It's okay, I've been with you through this process." And before that, Aurora, I assume that was the daughter's name, but I wasn't sure about that either. Whether that she's been emphasizing the importance of the materiality of life, looking at photos and books and thinking about an older person's life as left in the world in terms of these material objects, and then the loss of that material presence for the older woman, her mother. How did other people think? What did you make of that ending? I'd be really interested to know.
I will briefly sum up what you said. Bueno, la profesora Susan ha hablado sobre el cortometraje de Aurora, haciendo una respuesta a tu palabra clave fantasmas. Y bueno, mencionó que la hija finalmente sube a su madre de una forma al mundo digital y quería ella preguntar cómo han interpretado el resto este hecho. Y si es que han encontrado un tipo de revelación en este final, porque para ella más bien fue horrible o fantasmagórico, ¿no? Bueno, luego también ha mencionado la materialidad de la vida o cómo nos encontramos nosotros en los objetos materiales y cómo esto es básicamente lo que transciende de nosotros, ¿no? Lo único. Y si esto se pierde, entonces, ¿qué queda de nosotros?
Thank you very much, Cecilia. I think, Robert, you raised your hand.
Yes, because we are the ones who selected the movie, so Obviously, I mean, this is what Carlos just said. I mean, this is what was one of the appeals, particularly of Juan. I mean, the appearance of the fantasmas. Bueno, pero nosotros seleccionamos, por ejemplo, a Juan por esa misma razón, porque aparece un fantasma, porque lo fantasmático es una cosa que encontramos, bueno, en nuestras investigaciones en cualquier momento, si hay apocalipsis, hay algo fantasmático o fantasmas. So we have seen this very often here at Kappas. I mean, this is at the moment of apocalypse. I mean, something like a ghost appears, which is particularly that sort of temporality we are talking about. The ghost is something of the presence, of the past, of the future. Entonces, bueno, el fantasma se caracteriza por una temporalidad, bueno, muy particular que me parece interesante porque pertenece al pasado y también al futuro y al presente. Entonces, es una temporalidad muy importante. And Susan, what you just said, I mean, this is, I was also, I mean, this is, Carlos said, I mean, they all have this in common that they see this as a new beginning. For me, Aurora is the movie that doesn't do that. I mean, that's, for me, dystopian. Entonces, de las películas, bueno, los que no tienen, digamos, bueno, una visión del apocalipsis como un comienzo, eso no es Aurora. Porque eso para mí es simplemente distópico. I think, I mean, this is exactly what I'm also interested in. Apocalypse is not only apocalypse, but also the negation of an end. This is, she says at some point, is the story, the mother says, is the story of the lifetime not enough? En algún momento la madre dice, es la historia de una vida, no es suficiente. Entonces, es esa negación entonces del fin que lo hace distópico. And I think, I mean, this is the dystopic sort of moment, I mean, when you negate the end. And I think, I mean, there's also that sort of thing would be interesting to know. I think, I mean, this is also reminiscent of Neuromancer and the flatlines. The sort of the Dixie flatline, I mean, which is in there. Creo que es una reminiscencia de Neuromancer de Gibson. La idea que es una conciencia, pero no es una conciencia, es otra vez una forma fantasmática. Entonces, I think, I mean, this is also what becomes of the mother is some sort of ghost, I mean, that it's haunted and haunting at the same time. But here I stop.
Timo, please go ahead.
Yeah, I think the idea of how ghostly presence is made a topic in each of the 5 short films is I think it's very interesting. And through that relate apocalyptic thinking to processes of mourning. And I think we have different takes on that in terms of how mourning is avoided and how it can be done and how I relate to the ghost or even acknowledge that it is phantasmatic or a ghost. And then to Susan, to your question, I conceived of the ending of Aurora that shortly before the mother calls her daughter's name, the daughter says something along the lines of, "Will she remember me?" And then there is, obviously, she remembers the name, but we don't know what comes next. If it's a ghostly presence that's haunting or calming. And I also think in Aurora we have like the avoidance of an end, which of course would mean to mourn or even to mourn together in the time that remains. And I think that's very, in all the other films, in Storge, I think it's a Greek word, so I'm not sure. Obviously we have a process of mourning that will have to start after the end of the short film. And I think that's a very interesting theme throughout the 5 short films.
Would you please give a brief translation of what Timo just said? Thank you.
Bueno, entonces de nuevo se ha mencionado que hay esta idea del fantasma en cada corto, pero ahora también se ha traído un nuevo tema que es el luto, y entonces cómo cada persona está de luto, cómo lo vive, cómo aparece el luto como un fantasma y cómo se lidia con este fantasma. Bueno, se menciona que la hija se pregunta si es que la mamá se va a acordar de ella, y entonces la mamá dice su nombre, pero nosotros como espectadores no sabemos qué es lo que viene después de eso. No sabemos si esta presencia va a ser tal vez de un fantasma, si va a ser positiva o negativa. Y después también se mencionaron como palabras clave el luto colectivo, individual, en el tiempo que resta. Y también una imagen muy bonita es que nuestro luto empieza después de terminar de ver el corto también. Entonces esta relación también con los espectadores.
Hay una, a mi juicio, conexión muy fuerte, a propósito de lo que han dicho Susan, Tim, Robert, entre tecnología, esquizofrenia y tiempo, porque también aparecen como metáforas subyacentes de una situación contemporánea, donde parece que más que enfrentarnos a la destrucción, nos enfrentamos a una condición muy profunda de abandono. Finalmente, todos los personajes se obsesionan por encontrar fantasmas porque están profundamente abandonados. Han sido abandonados por el recuerdo, han sido abandonados por la historia, han sido abandonados por su pobreza, han sido abandonados por la propia necesidad de un amor, como lo plantea el último trabajo, el de vez en cuando, en el que se tomaron decisiones y esas decisiones finalmente se convirtieron también en parte de la vida. Y, y me interesa mucho ese punto porque creo que la idea de esquizofrenia en Storge y la idea de la tecnología en Aurora ponen en evidencia esta cuestión de que el fantasma es lo que nunca cesa. Como decía Robert, es aquello que está en una temporalidad distinta de la que no podemos hacernos cargo, porque atraviesa todos los espacios que hemos ocupado, estamos ocupando o vamos a ocupar. De hecho, el fantasma ya está en el futuro antes que nosotros.
So Carlos is talking about the relationship between technology, schizophrenia, and time, and he finds metaphors in these short films that represent how we live in contemporary culture. So more than facing destruction, we are faced with this profound condition of being obsessed about ghosts and being left alone. We are abandoned, basically. So yes, this image of ghosts is never ending, and they live in another temporality. It passes every space, so future, present, and past. Yes, so this schizophrenic image is present in Storch, she said, and then the notion of technology in Aurora. I don't know if you want to comment on those.
The notions of ghosts is also like very interesting when we relate that to Revelation. And I just, when I heard Professor Ossa's comment, it made me remember Avery Gordon's just brief quote on ghostly matters, that haunting produces something to be done in the presence. And I think that's very interesting, because in that sense, the short films wouldn't only teach us something about, you know, aging and old age, but also, as Dr. Ossa just said, contemporary problems. If we think about Storch, you know, situations of vulnerability, economic injustice, the problems of demographic problems of care, and yeah, I think like that's a very interesting approach also to think about those short films. And yeah, thank you very much for that comment.
Muchas gracias.
Yeah, Susan, please.
I was wondering whether it's worth saying as well that ghosts are things that are sort of out of time and no longer age. So that's a sort of interesting thing, that Carlos is noting in all of the short films. And I wonder what sort of space they exist in relation to narratives of apocalypse and post-apocalypse, if at all. But I'm also thinking that a lot of the films offer us examples of what we might call generational discontinuity. So we have the older person looking after the younger disabled person in Storge, which is sort of the wrong way round in terms of the generations. And we have in the last film, the Songs for After a Revolution, the example of a revolution which we tend to associate, don't we, with youth and vigor and fervor. What happens when a revolution has got old and when it exists in memory, in perhaps, if you like, nostalgic memory. So I think that idea of, or a lot of the films, some of them at least, playing with that idea of generational discontinuity and idea of the ghost as sort of aging outside of time, well, not aging and existing outside of temporality. So messing with temporality and conventional notions of that in two different ways, through the ghost and through just sort of messing in terms of structure and normal notions of what happens at certain life stages. And I think lots of the films did that in quite interesting ways. I don't know if other people have got anything to add on
that. Could you translate that, please, Cecilia?
If I understood correctly, your main points were about there is this, well, temporality is shown in certain ways. You mentioned two important ones. And one is the normal structure of life, how we live life normally. And the other one is ghosts, right? Through ghosts. Okay, then I can. Bueno, entonces le tenía que preguntar porque no estaba segura si es que lo había entendido bien. Pero que en estos cortos se encuentra formas de tergiversar o de demostrar la temporalidad de maneras distintas, y por un lado tenemos entonces una estructura normal, lo que nuestras vivencias como seres humanos, digamos, normales, como vamos por la vida, y si no, tenemos esta idea de fantasmas, entonces como tenemos estas dos opciones, ¿no? No sé si tiene algún comentario al respecto.
Okay, thank you very much. Timo?
Yeah, I found striking that we have different examples of a confusion of time and of age. I viewed those scenes in Songs for After a Revolution, where the young schoolgirl in the car sings Fidel songs. She seems to be distracted. She obviously learned them, but then I thought she saw something on the street and that distracted her. And I mean, in the film, it's kind of a hint that there's not a real fit between the girl and the song. And the old people should have sung the songs. And I think that's really interesting how the film plays with that. And also there's a confusion of age in Beto, right after in the beginning, where he's asked, how old are you? And he says, I'm 4 or 5 years old, something like that. So there's some sort of disruption of time and of age. And we have that kind of cultural or time of society, also in like the US film, where there's the pieces about blacks not being POC black people not being allowed in certain restaurants. So we have kind of milestones like the Fidel Revolution, and then again something that does not really relate to that in terms of personal time and historical time or historical events, maybe.
Bueno, lo que mencionaba Timo es que hay una confusión entre el tiempo y otros elementos. Por ejemplo, se nota que hay una distracción en la mujer que canta las canciones de Fidel en el carro. Mencionó en uno de los cortos esta distancia o o confusión entre mujer, canción y las personas mayores. Luego, en el corto de Beto hay una disrupción también entre el tiempo, la edad o las edades y la cultura. Y finalmente también menciona en el cortometraje de Cuba también que por un lado se muestra entonces a las personas negras o que no pueden entrar a un restaurante y cómo esto también no tiene realmente que ver con la edad, pero igual se menciona en el mismo espacio, digamos.
Thank you, Ceci. Robert? I'm sorry, Robert, you're muted.
Okay, sorry.
Okay,
Keep forgetting.
thank you.
Just one more comment on the ghosts. I think this is really interesting and also important. This is, as far as I can see, I mean, there's two sort of ghostly presences. One is one you could call what Mark Fisher has called the sort of the ghostly presence of futures that never realized. Entonces hay una figura del fantasma que también es, el fantasma es un futuro que nunca se realizó. On the other hand, I mean, you have also this sort of the ghosts of my past. So the things that happened in the past, I mean, that are haunting the present. Por otro lado, también hay esos, los fantasmas del pasado que realmente que persiguen al presente. And in this respect, I would be really interested in what you think. I mean, this is for me, the two notes from a fragmented life and also Storck, I'm actually not sure how to pronounce this, have something in common that I would try to, I don't know, sort of explain in the beginning. The sort of the idea of the apocalypse of a time, I mean, that time needs to come to an end. Entonces me interesaría lo que piensan ustedes también sobre lo que hay en la peli The Notes from a Fragmented Life y también pero en Storge, because I see in both the sort of the idea, I mean, that the life is fragmented. I mean, this is, what's the father called again? Beto and Margarito. Margarito also has this sort of, it's a fragmented family history. There has his daughter there, his wife is there, and he has never married. And so I think, I mean, it's also in the last years of life, I mean, it's a different sort of, it's not chronological time, it's the sort of messianic time. For him, care then is a mechanism, I mean, to come to terms with his life. And I see this also in Notes from a Fragmented Life, I mean, where this is sort of performative. I mean, it's Notes from a Fragmented Life, but it's the story of a whole life, I mean, that is actually created through this movie. Entonces yo pienso que, bueno, que lo que me interesa también, o lo que me parece muy interesante también en esa peli Notes from a Fragmented Life, que es también una cosa que son fragmentos de una vida, pero de una manera performativa. La peli establece no solamente fragmentos, sino la historia hecha de fragmentos. Y eso es el tiempo, bueno, el tiempo mesiánico, ¿no? El tiempo que el tiempo necesita para terminar, pero eso solamente se puede si se acepta, bueno, que va a terminar la vida, el tiempo. Did I translate myself? Yes.
Yeah.
¿Puedo?
Sí, claro.
Gracias. Se han presentado varios cruces que son muy relevantes de lo que estamos discutiendo, porque fuera del fantasma, ahora nos encontramos con el duelo, pero también con la desilusión y con la idea de el fragmento. Y creo que la relación entre fantasma y fragmento anuda muy bien lo que estamos pensando, puesto que ambos básicamente se depositan en el tiempo e impiden cualquier ilusión de continuidad, cualquier idea de algo que funciona regular y lógicamente. En todos los films hay una especie como de quiebre, de destitución de lo que podríamos llamar sería el tiempo como normalidad. Y para que la propuesta de todos los realizadores se pueda cumplir, tienen que recurrir a un montaje, a una puesta en escena, a un concepto de estético que se organiza en torno a este doble carácter de un concepto estético donde la imagen se fragmenta y en su fragmentación se hace fantasmática. Y de esa manera atraviesa los cuerpos de los personajes y nos transmite también un poco su desolación.
Te voy a pedir al final que me repitas una partecita, pero por ahora, Carlos is saying that we find ourselves in a couple of crossroads. So we have mentioned phantoms, grief, disillusionment, fragments or fragmentation, probably both. So he wants to talk about the connection between phantoms and fragments or fragmentation. Both are deposited in time and do not allow for continuity. So we find destitution of time as a normality in all of these short films. And now I'm going to ask him about the last point. Necesitaría que me vuelvas a repetir lo de la estética del tiempo fragmentado, por favor.
Las películas organizan su relato contando una historia hecha de fragmentos y fantasmas. Y a consecuencia de eso, los personajes no están actuando, sino que más bien están padeciendo esa doble condición de estar fragmentados por su propia historia y volverse fantasmas de su propia historia.
So he mentions that the plots of these shorts are made out of fragments and phantoms. So the characters are not only acting, but are also perdón, los personajes no están solo actuando, pero son afectados por...
Son afectados por esta estética por esa estética y ese fantasma que finalmente ¿cómo se podría decir? Conduce sus vidas. No sé si sea el término más correcto, pero es como que ellos no nos están contando una historia en el fondo.
Ellos no lo están contando, sino los fragmentos hacen su historia.
Los fragmentos se han convertido en los fantasmas de su historia, de alguna forma.
So the fragments have become the phantoms of their story. They are not actively telling their stories. Gracias.
Ojalá se haya entendido. Pero genial, Cecilia, muchas gracias.
Well, I don't think, I mean, this is in Notes from a Fragmented Life. I would actually not see this. No estoy seguro si lo veo en eso de in Notes from a Fragmented Life. Es bueno, claro que se podría decir que no funciona. You could say, I mean, it doesn't work with this movie, but the attempt is still there to make this a narrative, the story of a life. Yo creo que el intento aquí es sí hacer la historia de una vida. Y en Storge, bueno, en cierta medida también. I'm not sure, I mean, in Storge, I have also the idea, I mean, it is, of course, it's fragmented, but I mean, it's sort of the last years, the last sort of actions are sort of bringing things together. Entonces, no sé, bueno, si mi idea sería, bueno, que, bueno, la vida es fragmentada, pero, bueno, con ese horizonte de la fin de la vida, sí, bueno, los fragmentos, bueno, no son un todo, pero sí, bueno, una estructura, bueno, que da sentido a estas experiencias.
Sí, sí, si yo no me refería a que el fragmento sustituyera a la historia, sino que al revés. La historia está, como tú bien lo dijiste, constituida por fragmentos que se terminan transformando también en la condición de vida de los personajes. Esa era un poco la idea, más que porque efectivamente, pensando por ejemplo en lo que ha señalado el teórico del cine peruano, Roberto Duarte, Storge pertenecería a una tradición latinoamericana del documental que se conoce como realismo sucio, donde se agudiza justamente la agonía de la vida bajo ciertas condiciones de precarización, por ejemplo. pero iba un poco más en la dirección que tú habías mencionado, que la idea de creer que por un lado está que el fragmento se apropió de la película. ¿Mm? Perdón.
Listo, disculpa, voy a hacer una pequeña pausita porque si no voy a perder el
Sí.
hilo. Entonces, bueno, sorry. What he
Mira, en
was saying.
suma, Ceci, en suma, a ver si lo podemos ordenar bien. En suma, no es que los fragmentos se hayan apropiado de la película, sino que la historia de los personajes es una historia de fragmentos. Creo que
Sí. So what he wants to make clear is that not that the fragment substitutes or takes over the story, but that the story is constituted by fragments. And this fragmentation becomes the condition of the characters. And then he mentioned that Roberto Duarte, who is a Peruvian cinema theorist, talks about a tradition called the dirty realism in Latin American cinema. And this can be seen in Storch because it thematizes the agony of life in conditions of precarity, of poverty.
I can relate to the idea of something dirty or dirty reality. And I also, in my view, it's not so much about fragments that compose a story or don't, but about something, well, objective, like in the Kristeva sense of an abject. I think we have that in each of the films. I think Beto's aggression is something like that. And of course, poverty in old age in terms of cultural things. The beggars on the street of Havana in Songs for After a Revolution is something objective. The news Aurora doesn't want to see on television is something objective. The fact that Margarito goes scavenging is something that could stand in that line. And also the role of Fidel in contemporary young school children in Cuba. I think, and these are, I think, to me, this is something different from fragments, but we have a whole, and then some things that remind us that not all fit in, not all person, and not all themes.
Excuse me, Timo, could you repeat the word you were using? Objection.
Like, yeah.
Lo abyecto, según Kristeva, no es una palabra común.
Ok, sí, está
Carlos probablemente sabe, ¿no?
Sí, bueno, Carlos, espero que conozcas la palabra lo abyecto.
sí, Julia Kristeva, la abyección.
Ya, la abyección. Entonces,
eso que votamos del cuerpo siendo el cuerpo, es la excrescencia de la vida siendo la vida.
Ok. Bueno, entonces vas a entender lo que comentó Timo, y es que, bueno, él sí encuentra esta suciedad, refiriéndose al realismo sucio que habías mencionado tú, pero dice que no encuentra esta idea de que la vida de los personajes se constituye de fragmentos, sino más bien de algo objetivo, y ahí viene lo abyecto, ¿no? O sea, dice que hay varias imágenes, sobre todo en el corto sobre Cuba, de las personas, por ejemplo, pidiendo limosna, y bueno, ahí me distraje un poco porque estaba buscando ese término, pero mencionó un par más de imágenes que él relaciona con este término.
Sí. Bueno, esto siempre, lo más interesante del cine es que las discrepancias ayudan a pensar colectivamente un problema que las imágenes nunca cierran. Quizás el verdadero poder de las imágenes es que nunca nos dejan cerrar el pensamiento. Pero quería llamar la atención sobre dos cosas a propósito de lo que ha señalado Susan en un par de ocasiones, y que tiene que ver también con otro giro que me gustaría comentar y agregar respecto a lo que se ha dicho. Y es que tradicionalmente en el imaginario cultural occidental, las mujeres ejercen la memoria desde las emociones, desde lo privado y de los domésticos, dentro de lo que podríamos llamar una cierta caricatura patriarcal. Pero en el caso de Aurora, es notable el hecho de que ella sencillamente se aboca a buscar en la tecnología, en apoderarse de la tecnología, el modo de preservar el recuerdo de su madre y hundirse con ella. Entonces, me parece interesante también el desliz, el quiebre de la relación memoria-género que hace Aurora como problema, como también otro ejercicio también de lectura.
So Carlos is replying to you, Susan, and adding that traditionally in Western culture, women form memories through emotions and from a private place. And then he said keyword patriarchy. But then with Aurora, we see a break in this because she tries to make find a way to make her own memories through using technology and through finding how to use it. So then we see this break in the relationship between memory and gender.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, I hadn't thought about that. I suppose that our association between women and sort of the body and embodiment, as well as with memory, might be a slight counter to that, in that I felt, as I said before, that there was this real elegiac feeling in the film for the material and the embodied, and that's sort of what's been lost at the end of the film, and that is associated with women and their experience. But just to change the subject slightly and to go back to fragments, thinking about the form of the films is also really quite interesting, because so the Songs for the Revolution had the split screen, didn't it? And the American film, Now and Then, was the animated one with the sort of part, the sort of abrupt, jerky parts of animated things appearing on screen and so on. And I also felt that with the very first one, Juan, there was a lot of focus on, hands and small details and fragments. So I actually wonder if the forms of the films are also making that point about fragmentation. Sorry, two things for you to translate there. So the first point about women and materiality as well as memory, and then the second point about the form of the films embodying fragmentation.
Yes, I did get your point about the material being related to the woman, but how would you describe it being different from how men do? Because I don't think I got to that point.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just that women have culturally and historically been associated with the body more than men who've been associated with mind. Nothing more complicated than that, really.
Ok, perfecto. Bueno, entonces, para responderte a ti, Carlos, Susan hizo una asociación entre, notó la asociación que hay entre mujer, cuerpo y memoria, como tú, ¿no? Y dijo nuevamente que lo material está relacionado a la mujer, como digamos, la mente está más relacionada al hombre, ¿no? O sea, mujer, cuerpo, hombre, mente. Entonces, esto era como que una forma de resumir el tema, y luego quería ella empezar, digamos, irse en otra dirección, y es de los fragmentos que hacen, o sea, en ya uso de técnicas cinematográficas, como estos componen los cortos, ¿no? Entonces, tenemos, por ejemplo, el uso de la pantalla dividida en dos en el corto de Canciones de la Revolución, o si no, también cómo se utiliza la animación en la película americana, la segunda, ¿no? Y luego en la primera, los detalles, digamos, esta estética fragmentada, cómo se muestran, por ejemplo, las manos, y cómo todo esto se vuelve un todo, ¿no? Pero que está hecho de fragmentos. Tal vez ella opina que se ha hecho adrede, ¿no? Como a propósito, usar estas técnicas para que se note que se trata de fragmentación también.
Robert, you're still on mute. Sorry.
Sorry, and I'm just incapable of, I don't know, after how many years I still can't do this. Okay, because something Susan just said, I mean, this is also what I thought, I mean, about Juan is really interesting. I mean, it's the sort of, on one hand, I mean, we have the ghostly sort of aspect, but on the other hand, I mean, it really emphasizes materiality, you know? I mean, there's all the senses are really, I mean, the sort of the materiality of old age. I mean, I think this was really interesting. Yo pienso que también en Juan lo que es particularmente interesante es, por un lado, tenemos bueno, lo fantasmático, pero por otro lado también un gran énfasis en lo material, también, bueno, que todos los sensos, hay también, no sé, bueno, eso de tocar cosas, bueno, y todo eso me parecía muy interesante. What I also wanted to ask you, because I'm not actually sure, I mean, how much time we have left. I think we only scheduled for an hour. But the one, I mean, this is when I was watching this, I'm not sure if anybody has similar thoughts. Bueno, si me interesa saber algo sobre Songs After the Revolution. A mí me pareció muy interesante la idea de, bueno, que no es solamente, bueno, sobre, bueno, el fin de algo, sino de un fin de un mundo que se suponía que era un nuevo mundo, ¿no? La revolución que creó un nuevo mundo del socialismo y también un nuevo hombre. And so I thought, I mean, this is what Songs After the Revolution, I thought this was a particularly interesting aspect, and this is not just about old age, about some time ending, but it's the sort of the ending of the revolution, which was supposed to create the new world of socialism and also the new man. I mean, this was always the sort of thing. I mean, Che Guevara and all these people, it's not enough to do the revolution. We have to create a new form of humanity. And so I'm not really sure, I mean, if this is just in my head or if you saw something like this too.
Sí, por favor.
Sí, quisiera agregar, a propósito de lo que se ha señalado, que cada uno de los films, en alguna medida, es una cierta forma de pasado, que cuenta una historia bajo una cierta condición, un cierto modelo, una cierta estética de pasado. Y probablemente eso también tenga que ver con el uso del fragmento, porque al pasado solamente se lo puede recuperar en fragmentos. Pero por otro lado, están siempre presentes y son, como decía Susan y Robert, son parte de la narración también. Entonces no son meramente instrumentales, hacen posible la narración. En Juan, lo inquietante es cómo este hombre nos mira todo el tiempo. Él no mira la cámara, él nos está mirando todo el tiempo, como si nosotros pudiéramos responder la pregunta que él está haciendo, que probablemente sea ¿dónde estás? Que es una pregunta política que ha atravesado el dolor latinoamericano. ¿Dónde están? ¿Mm? En el caso de las canciones después de las... Perdón.
Yo quiero pedir un momentito, una pausita. Sí, lo siento.
Sí.
So Carlos wanted to add that each film is telling a kind of past or a different past, and this is why each story is told from a certain aesthetic and in a certain way, no? And then he mentioned that the past can only be recovered or reconstructed, this is maybe my addition, from fragments, and maybe this is why it was decided to use these kind of aesthetics or techniques to tell the stories, right? To make the plot happen. So it's not only instrumental, but maybe even fundamental, or it drives the plot. Y ahora, disculpa Carlos, pero necesito que me repitas la pregunta de dónde estás, dónde están, bueno, el ejemplo, porque...
El ejemplo, es que era una alusión un poco a la pregunta latinoamericana de los que ha recorrido la política, ¿dónde están? La pregunta política latinoamericana es ¿dónde están?
I think the first part
Sí,
was,
no,
I mean,
eso sí
this
lo
is...
entiendo, pero perdón, sí. Robert, you
No,
can.
no, because I mean, this is just because that's an interesting point I don't want to lose. I mean, what Carlos said before is that Juan, I mean, he's permanently, we are the sort of, we are not looking at him, the gaze is always toward us. And this is what he says is the question, I mean, so where are you? And I think that's just a general human condition, but particularly in the Latin American context, I mean, it has a particular significance.
Yes. Where are you or where are they? This is a question that is asked constantly and still now in every country in different contexts, but we share this, unfortunately.
Sí, y quería hacer un breve comentario a propósito de la observación que hizo Timo, que efectivamente las canciones después de la revolución hablan efectivamente de un mundo objetivo, lo que es hoy día la sociedad cubana. Pero por otro lado, aparece como esto que decía Robert, de allí todavía hay alguien que cree en el socialismo, aunque no está en ninguna parte. Entonces, también se introduce una temporalidad que no tiene que ver objetivamente con la situación que viven diariamente los cubanos, sino que también tiene que ver con todo este énfasis que él pone, el director, en mostrar cómo niñas, niños cantan, repiten poemas que les enseñan en los colegios, en donde se reivindica este modelo social y sus héroes. Y uno lo podría leer básicamente como adoctrinamiento, pero un poquito más, es como que está por venir, siempre está por venir ese socialismo que en el resto del mundo aparentemente fue derrotado.
Entonces, como entre ideología y romantización.
Claro, es que es una especie como de fantasma, el fantasma ideológico también.
Okay, so
¿Por qué dejar de soñar? ¿Por qué? ¿Por qué tendríamos que dejar de soñar?
So Timo, he was replying to you, and he says that in songs for revolution, where we see an objective world, which is Cuban society, but we also see that someone still believes in socialism, or some people still believe in socialism. So we see a different temporality. You know, we see Cuban society, but then also this maybe romanticizing a temporality that could be seen as indoctrination, for example, in schools where children still learn these kind of songs. But I think what he's trying to say is that there is still this hope that it might work, you know, like this model might still sometime come and maybe save them.
I feel bad interrupting the discussion because it's been so interesting, but I think since we only scheduled for 1 hour and it's also quite late in Europe, I think if you don't have anything very important you want to share, that we might have to come to an end. And I wanted to thank Cecilia again. Thank you so much for your translation. It was very helpful. Thank you so much. And thank you to you, to our participants. Muchas gracias por tomar su tiempo para poder asistir a esa charla. Fue muy interesante compartirlo con usted, también con usted, profe. Muchas gracias. Y sí. Estamos en contacto. We are going to see each other in Heidelberg. And yeah, thank you again to the organizers. Robert, last word is yours.
No, I just, well, thank you too. Thank all of you. Okay, we have to stop at this point, but I also wanted already to announce we are doing with these sort of selected movies something at Heidelberg at Kappas next year. So we have still to figure out what it will be exactly. So this is not the end of discussion. Bueno, solamente quería también, bueno, decir que, bueno, que ahora tenemos que terminar, pero vamos también a hacer algo con estos cortos en el año que viene en Heidelberg, de una forma, un workshop o algo. Entonces, bueno, y eso también se va a transmitir o la gente puede participar. Entonces, bueno, siempre es una buena idea mirar lo que pasa en Capas. Tenemos un programa muy interesante. Entonces, ok, bueno, últimas palabras. Muchas gracias a todos. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yo también agradecerles infinitamente este tiempo, este